Hey Rose, it's Wednesday, February 12th. So, if you're watching this, that means that you have two parents. Now, I'm not talking about like your parents are together versus not together, or like maybe you've never met your dad or anything like that. I just mean that two humans had sex, probably, although there are other possibilities here I guess, but probably had sex and made you. Those two humans are your parents, and you have two of them. That is because it takes two people to make a person, and because of that you can trace back your ancestry exponentially. Stick with me here. This is probably gonna seem very simple at first, but it'll be worth it. For example, you are one thing. If you take the number of you there are, 1, and times it by 2, you get 2, the number of parents that you have. And if you take that number, 2, times 2, you get 4, the number of grandparents you have, and so on. Most of us are lucky enough to know our grandparents, and if your recent ancestors had children at a young age, you might even know a great-grandparent, or a few. But have you ever thought about all of your great-grandparents? I haven't. When I was young, my great-grandmother was still alive, my nanny. And when I think of great-grandparent, I think of her. Every time. But when it comes to it, she was just one of 8 of my great-grandparents. Now for most people, that's as far back in our ancestry as we tend to think of. I can't name all 8 of my great-grandparents, and out of their 16 parents, my great-great-grandparents, I can't name even one. That's the grandparents of my grandparents. Just think about that. Picture your grandparents as little kids. They had their own grandparents to like squeeze their cheeks and give them cookies and stuff. And they had their own parents, 32 of them in fact, and they had their own grandparents, 64 of them. So now we are at your grandparents, grandparents, grandparents. There are 64 of them. Now let's think about them for a minute. If we estimate a generation to be about 25 to 30 years, or about the age a lot of people have kids, then we can assume that these people were your age around 1850, or about 150 years ago. Even more bizarre is that these 64 people were complete strangers, with their own lives likely wandering around different parts of the world, and a vast majority of them never even met each other at all. To recap, there were 64 complete strangers 150 years ago who all made the exactly perfect life decisions to make you happen 150 years later. Wow. Of those 64 people, the 32 men eventually met the 32 women, they had sex and had a child. But each of those 32 pairs were still complete strangers to all the other pairs until their 16 boys met the other 16 girls who then had sex and had a child. That brought them together. Think about your grandparents. Your maternal and paternal grandparents probably didn't know each other until your parents met. And then they were like, "Your son is dating our daughter. Nice to meet you." Likely they became connected when your parents started dating or got married, but at the very least it was you that brought them together. Now basically this is all pretty simple math, but when put into context, what I like to take away from it is how lucky we are to be here. It's really humbling actually. If you add up everyone from those 64 people 150 years ago all the way down to your own parents, that's 126 different people. Since the mid-1800s, if even a single one of those 126 people didn't meet their destined partner, or decide to have kids when they did, or maybe even accidentally have kids when they did, then you wouldn't be here. Between those 126 people, there were 63 romantic relationships that made you happen. Rose, I am so glad that your 64 great-great-great-great-grandparents from the 1800s and my 64 great-great-great-great-grandparents from the 1800s did what they needed to do so that I can say, "Rose, I will see you on Friday." Valentine's Day. How fitting.